What if I told you that the wildest rumors circulating in anime convention hallways weren't just gossip but actual predictions of a cultural meltdown? While most fans dismiss these whispers as paranoid speculation, 15 seemingly impossible rumors transformed into devastating reality, reshaping the entire convention landscape forever. The first shock hit when Anime Expo 2024 didn't just sell out fast. It declared every single one-day pass completely gone, then confirmed the entire convention was sold out with absolutely no on-site badge sales available. This wasn't some marketing stunt or artificial scarcity. This was policy becoming a locked door, turning what used to be a last-minute decision into an impossible dream. Fans who'd been casually planning to grab badges at the door found themselves completely shut out, watching from the outside as over 407,000 people flooded downtown LA like an unstoppable tidal wave. But here's where it gets genuinely terrifying. The whispers about this will be the biggest AX ever weren't just hype anymore. They were warnings. Organizers reported attendance numbers that turned every hallway into a parade route, every queue into an endurance test, and every moment into a struggle against the crushing weight of pure human density. When fans said it felt like every corridor had become a slow-moving river of bodies and merchandise bags, they weren't exaggerating. The show had genuinely scaled to stadium proportions. The breaking point came when attendees started warning that AX 2022 wouldn't just be busy. They predicted it might trigger actual safety interventions from city authorities. They were absolutely right. The Los Angeles Fire Department stepped in and asked organizers to open more sections of the convention center just to relieve the dangerous pressure building outside the venue. When rumors end with fire marshals making emergency calls, that's not speculation anymore. That's a real-time crisis unfolding exactly as predicted. The legend of LineCon evolved into something far more sinister in 2023. Social media exploded with warnings about heat exhaustion, impossible queues, and conditions so brutal they tested people's dedication to the hobby itself. Survivors described an artist alley that felt like walking through a furnace and lines that pushed human patience to its absolute breaking point. The most disturbing part, people predicted it, dreaded it, and then lived through it anyway, proving that pre-convention whispers had become as reliable as weather forecasts. These weren't random accidents or growing pains. They were warning signals of a cultural scene expanding so aggressively that basic infrastructure couldn't adapt fast enough to contain it. When badges evaporate hours before doors open, when attendance jumps from huge to historically unprecedented, and when city emergency services have to intervene just to keep people safe, you're witnessing something far more significant than a successful convention. You're standing inside a cultural surge that's completely out of control. But the sellout chaos was just the beginning of a much darker transformation that would reshape the entire industry. The calendar doesn't lie, and when rumors start moving dates and canceling major shows, you can measure the destruction in canceled hotel blocks, rebooked flights, and the panic of group chats scrambling at 2 a.m. What looked like fan paranoia kept morphing into corporate policy, and the fallout was absolutely brutal. It started with a whisper that should have been impossible: Crunchyroll Expo is getting shelved. Most people laughed it off because billion-dollar companies don't just pull conventions off the board without warning. Except they absolutely do. The streaming giant quietly shifted focus to partner events and studio activations, turning what was supposed to anchor the late summer convention season into a blank weekend that destroyed thousands of plans. Vendors who'd been banking on a crucial sales spike found themselves scrambling to reroute inventory. Panel pitches got recycled for other stages. The expo that fans expected to be their guaranteed annual meetup just vanished into corporate strategy, proving that no convention is too established to disappear overnight. The next bombshell hit New York with surgical precision. Locals had spent years building their identity around November conventions. Jackets over cosplay, breath fogging up mask visors, photos that looked cinematic under early winter sunsets. So when insiders started whispering they're moving Anime NYC to August, it felt like someone suggesting Times Square should go quiet on New Year's Eve. But this wasn't just a date change, it was a complete ecosystem disruption. Cosplayers had to completely redesign their wardrobes, swapping thermal layers for breathable fabrics that could survive brutal summer heat. hotels that were booked solid for holiday markets suddenly had to juggle a completely different crowd with totally different needs. The most shocking part, out-of-towners who'd planned their biggest trip of the year around Thanksgiving suddenly had to negotiate time off during the hottest, most vacation-heavy stretch of the calendar. The rumors sounded like a simple vibe shift, but it became a full identity crisis for one of the country's most established conventions. Then came the whisper that seemed completely insane: they'll add a fourth day next year. Adding an extra day isn't just tossing another sunrise onto your badge. It's a logistical nightmare involving freight schedules, union contracts, AV equipment, panel curation, and security staffing that scales like a final boss fight. When the confirmation dropped, travel forums exploded into chaos. Locals started strategizing which day would focus on panels and signings versus exhibit halls and artist alleys. Out-of-towners did panicked flight math: fly in Wednesday or risk missing Thursday morning's exclusive content. Exhibitors celebrated an extra selling window, but immediately started bracing for the physical stamina test of maintaining energy for 4 straight days. Creators got strategic, shifting headline panels away from the traditionally crushed Saturday into days where dedicated fans could actually secure seats. The community adjusted to this new marathon format in hours, not weeks, proving how desperately the scene needed more space, but also how quickly these changes could overwhelm people's resources. The pattern became impossible to ignore when Otakon veterans heard the annual prediction: "This'll be the one that breaks every record again." You can only cry wolf so many times, unless the wolf actually keeps growing at an exponential rate. Another year brought another ceiling completely shattered. Line management teams had to learn entirely new sections of convention centers. Cosplay meetups spilled into areas that had never hosted events before. Panelists could feel the energy buzzing before they even reached their microphones, because packed rooms created this electric atmosphere at the moment doors opened. What these industry earthquakes really revealed wasn't just growing popularity, they were pressure release valves for a market that was tightening beyond anyone's ability to predict or control. The cancellations showed which corporate bets weren't worth doubling down on. The summer schedule shifts revealed where demand had become so intense that traditional timing couldn't contain it anymore. The extra days proved the ceiling had moved so high that weekend formats couldn't accommodate the surge. And here's what nobody wanted to admit: with bigger calendars and longer weekends came much stricter rules about who gets in and how. Everyone loves the celebrity panels and exclusive premieres. Nobody loves the part where your belt sets off a metal detector and your backpack gets thoroughly searched like you're boarding an international flight. But the whispers about airport rules weren't fear-mongering, they became the new baseline reality. And once you understand why, you realize how close these events came to complete disaster. The underground chatter said security lanes, metal detector wands, and mandatory bag checks weren't a temporary COVID measure, they were permanent fixtures that would fundamentally change how conventions operate. That future arrived one metal archway at a time, turning every entrance into a checkpoint that would make TSA agents feel right at home. Security isn't just a mood anymore, it's a complex flowchart that determines whether you make it to your first panel or spend the morning repacking prohibited items on the sidewalk. The cosplay community adapted with military precision, but the learning curve was absolutely brutal. Detachable armor pieces for faster inspection became standard. Soft materials replaced rigid components that trigger lengthy examinations. Safety orange zip ties became the new aesthetic choice over metal clasps that caused delays. Props had to be completely reimagined around piece bonding requirements that treat foam swords like actual weapons. The payoff was fewer genuinely scary incidents inside the venues, but the cost was time, massive amounts of time that turned arrival into an endurance test. But the real shock came when people discovered that RFID access control wasn't a gentle suggestion. It was a mandatory system that could instantly lock you out if you made one simple mistake. The dramatic warnings about tap in, tap out, or lose your entire day seemed like typical convention paranoia until people started learning the hard way that forgetting to scan at exit doors would flag your badge as potentially stolen or duplicated. Tap in and tap out gates solved two critical problems simultaneously: counterfeit badges and capacity management. but they created a completely new mini-game called Remembering to Beep at Every Rectangle. First-time attendees rolled their eyes at veteran badge wearers who positioned lanyards at exactly mid-chest height for clean, quick swipes. The upside became obvious quickly. Lost badges could be deactivated within minutes, and organizers actually knew how packed a hall was before it reached subway cart rush hour density levels. The downside? Pure panic when someone realizes they never tapped out for lunch and has to sprint back to a door before their badge gets permanently flagged as suspicious. In a world where real-time attendance counts keep fire marshals calm and legal, that little plastic square around your neck became the most important piece of tech you'd carry all weekend. Then came the policy that split the community right down the middle. Main stage events are now completely phone-free zones. No exceptions. One side argued they'd paid good money to be there and deserved to document their experience. The other side faced the harsh reality that some premieres and guest performances were strictly witness-only content that could never be officially released. The new enforcement turned the glow of any screen into an immediate red flag. Announcements at entrance doors left zero room for interpretation. Signage became impossible to miss. Staff received training to give exactly one warning before escorting violators directly to the exit. Some venues started bagging devices entirely, while others relied on honor systems backed by incredibly vigilant ushers who could spot a hidden phone screen from across a packed auditorium. The most surprising result? Once the policy got serious enforcement, the atmosphere inside these events dramatically improved. Laughs hit like synchronized waves instead of scattered chuckles. Gasps rippled through crowds with perfect timing. The shared experience felt genuinely communal rather than fragmented by hundreds of individual recording attempts. For many attendees, that collective energy was exactly what they'd been missing without realizing it. But perhaps the most controversial change was the shift to digital reservation systems that promised to fix line culture forever while creating entirely new forms of chaos. The quiet rumor that panels might need advance reservations this year sounded like a reasonable tech solution to a very human problem of people wasting entire days standing in hallways. The system worked exactly as advertised in some ways. App-based time slots, scheduled entry windows, and QR code verification meant doors could open calmly without the traditional stampede. Standby lines stopped consuming half of people's convention experience. But the reservation system introduced a completely different kind of adrenaline rush that felt more like sneaker drops than fan events. Drop times for popular panels became high-stakes moments that demanded split-second reflexes. Push notifications arriving during weekend brunch plans could make or break someone's entire convention schedule. The existential dread of seeing 0 out of 4 panels confirmed on your phone screen created a new category of convention anxiety that nobody had prepared for. The Discord servers exploded with trading posts. "I got Friday morning, you got Saturday evening." And attendees started carrying external battery packs like medical devices because a dead phone could mean missing reservation windows entirely. When servers crashed under load, forums transformed into therapy sessions. When the system worked perfectly, though, venues felt dramatically fairer. ADA accessibility rows stayed properly clear, and fewer people wasted precious hours standing in lines for panels they mathematically could never access. These security measures and access controls turned rumors into daily routines that every attendee had to master. Badge scanning became muscle memory. Phone policies became pocket habits. Reservation notifications became scheduled alarms. It wasn't glamorous infrastructure, but it was the scaffolding holding up the actual moments people traveled hundreds of miles to experience. And the moment that scaffolding started wobbling, when a hall reached dangerous capacity or when exclusive content leaked online anyway, everyone remembered exactly why these rules had hardened from suggestions into absolute requirements. But the most disturbing revelations were still hiding behind the scenes. The final set of rumors that came true didn't just predict policy changes, they exposed the genuinely disturbing underbelly of what happens when massive crowds, corporate interests, and inadequate oversight collide in ways that put real people at serious risk. The scariest prediction started as typical online paranoia. Anime NYC 2021 will become a national health watch point. At first, it sounded like fear-mongering from people who wanted to cancel everything forever. Then a new variant started dominating headlines, and suddenly a regional convention became part of a much larger story that had federal health departments paying attention. Attendees began receiving direct alerts from local health authorities. Twitter threads transformed into impromptu contact tracing networks that nobody had asked for or expected. People who'd grabbed masks just in case ended up keeping them on for entire weekends. Photo opportunities moved outdoors not because of aesthetic preferences, but because indoor air circulation became a legitimate survival concern. Ventilation systems, something literally nobody discussed before 2020, became a full-blown obsession, with attendees trading information about which entrance doors had the best airflow like they were discussing rare collectible drops. Hand sanitizer became as essential as Sharpies for autographs. Badge lanyards had to share neck space with small packets of disinfectant wipes. For the first time in convention history, people genuinely factored air quality into their queue strategies, avoiding packed hallways not because of claustrophobia, but because of legitimate health fears that organizers seemed completely unprepared to address. The return of AX Chibi sparked whispers that seemed almost too good to be true. It won't be a tiny AX, it'll be its own completely different beast. When fans heard about a mini convention in Ontario, most people pictured some cute, watered-down warm-up event. What actually materialized was a focused, intimate experience that made the main convention's problems brutally obvious by comparison. Smaller halls transformed guest interactions from brief encounters into genuine conversations. Artists who got completely buried by the flood of people in downtown LA suddenly had time to discuss custom commissions and actually connect with fans. Families who felt overwhelmed by July's human tidal wave discovered something they could explore comfortably in a single afternoon without requiring military-level logistics planning. But the most revealing aspect was how much better the smaller format worked for almost everything that mattered. The rumor was completely accurate, but the real meaning of Chibi shifted from less content to closer connections, proving that bigger definitely wasn't always better, despite what the industry kept pushing. The darkest transformation happened in Artist Alley, where underground warnings about rule changes turned into a complete crackdown that caught countless vendors completely off guard. For years, the back-channel advice was simple: don't risk borrowing someone else's table. Staff are starting to check IDs more carefully. Then the language hardened dramatically, and enforcement became absolutely ruthless. Seller permits became mandatory requirements with zero exceptions. Table transfers got banned outright, ending years of informal arrangements that had helped struggling artists. More than a few people discovered that "I'm just helping a friend sell their work" wasn't considered a valid loophole anymore. Tax identification numbers had to be filed weeks in advance. Inventory documentation became required paperwork that could make or break someone's entire weekend. The official justification focused on protecting original artists and preventing counterfeit merchandise from infiltrating the market. The reality was a much cleaner accounting system that eliminated gray areas, but also eliminated a lot of the informal community support that had made Artist Alley accessible to newcomers who couldn't afford official vendor status. But here's what nobody wants to discuss publicly: the rumors that didn't make it into official policy but absolutely shaped how people experienced these events. Whispers about harassment issues that were being systematically covered up. Stories about staff members who were quietly reassigned after incidents that never made it into incident reports. Warnings about certain areas of convention centers that became genuinely unsafe after certain hours. The underground networks that developed to share this information looked like witness protection programs more than fan communities. People developed coded language to discuss problematic individuals without triggering legal consequences. Photo sharing groups implemented verification systems that would make intelligence agencies proud. The line between community safety and paranoid surveillance became impossible to identify. These weren't isolated incidents or one-off problems. They were systematic issues that revealed how completely unprepared the convention infrastructure was to handle the scale and intensity of what these events had become. When you pack tens of thousands of people into spaces that were never designed for that density, when you create environments where normal social rules get suspended, and when you add inadequate security and overwhelmed staff, dangerous situations become mathematically inevitable. The most disturbing part, the people who tried to report these problems often found themselves facing more consequences than the individuals who'd created them in the first place. Convention organizers had strong incentives to minimize anything that might damage their reputation or create legal liability, which meant that legitimate safety concerns got buried under corporate damage control strategies. This is why the paranoid fans who started treating rumor season like disaster preparation weren't actually paranoid. They were reading signals that showed a community outgrowing its ability to police itself safely. The early badge purchases, the detailed safety planning, the backup communication networks, and the careful documentation habits weren't symptoms of anxiety culture. They were adaptive responses to genuinely dangerous conditions that organizers were incentivized to downplay or ignore. Every rumor that survived contact with reality had the same underlying structure. A community reading pressure and problems before official announcements acknowledged them. Fans noticed when systems were breaking down. Staff members recognized when policies weren't working. Vendors felt demand patterns that predicted market changes. When those signals aligned, the whispers you heard in Artist Alley on Friday became the policy updates you read on Monday morning. The transformation of anime conventions from casual community gatherings into highly regulated corporate-managed events wasn't an accident or a natural evolution. It was an emergency response to problems that had spiraled completely out of control. The security measures, the digital systems, the strict enforcement policies, and the constant rule changes weren't improvements to fan experience. They were desperate attempts to prevent catastrophic failures that could have destroyed the entire scene. So no, you're not being paranoid when you plan around the rumor mill and treat convention prep like disaster planning. You're being realistic about participating in events that have grown beyond their infrastructure's ability to manage safely. And being early with your planning, your purchases, and your safety strategies isn't just how you get the experience you want, it's how you make sure you get home with the memories you came for, instead of the trauma you never expected.